But first, I just wanted to acknowledge at the outset the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the AIIA and the Turrbal people, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Can I also acknowledge a number of distinguished guests we have this evening? Can I acknowledge Graham Perrott, MP, Federal Member for Moreton, and Assistant Minister, Shadow Minister for Education. Can I acknowledge the Honourable Colin Forrest, Justice of the Family Court of Australia, and one of our councillors. Can I acknowledge, of course, the German Honorary Consul for Queensland, Professor Michael Rosemann, who is the QUT Professor for Information Systems and Director for the Centre for Future Enterprise. And his not immediate past, but his immediate past Honorary Consul for Germany and Queensland, and a great old engineering friend, Daniel Salsa, also wonderful to have here. And finally, can I acknowledge our National Executive Director of the Australian Institute of International Affairs, Dr. Bryce Wakefield. And Bryce has been allowed out of Canberra. We allow him up here now. I just would like to give Bryce just a couple of minutes to talk about the AIIA nationally and a little bit about our relationship as a nation with Germany. So without further ado, I'll pull up Bryce.
Actually, I'm probably going to talk more about the relationship with Germany with the AIIA. It's great you're here, and if you want to be a member of the AIIA, which I would thoroughly recommend, this is the guy to talk to. I'd like also to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I want to thank all and the members of the Queensland branch and Council of the Australian Institute of International Affairs for inviting me here. It's great to get out of Canberra. I like Canberra, but I also like Brisbane. And I also want to acknowledge Graham Perrott, the federal member. Jonathan Fogarty from SAP, who's a sponsor for tonight, so the Consul General for sponsoring this event. Thank you very much. And thanks also to Michael Rosemann for addressing this tonight. I also want to acknowledge that there are almost many guests here from Germany, many people with German ancestry, and many people who are taking the time to study German. And it's been a while, but es ist eine Freude und auch eine Ehre, hier heute Abend hier sprechen zu können. Denn es sind nicht nur die kalten rationalen Instrumente des Staates, die Verträge und hohe Diplomatie, die die internationalen Beziehungen definieren, sondern auch die warmen, emotionellen Verbindungen, die zu gegenseitigen Verhältnissen, Verständnis und transnationalen Gemeinschaften führen. Mit anderen Worten sind sie ein wichtiger Teil der Beziehungen zwischen Australien und Deutschland. So. So now that I have butchered the German language, I will turn my hand to slaughtering the English. The Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade website refers to the Australian-Germany partnership as warm, vibrant, and diverse. There are formal roadmaps which set our priority areas of the relationship, such as the Berlin-Canberra Declaration of Intent on a Strategic Relationship, which itemizes such areas as defense, economic relations, energy, climate cooperation, development, science and innovation, social policy, and people-to-people links. There's a lot to work on. And it's a good thing that we have this roadmap in Australia, because the signs are that Germany's commitment to the region looks set to intensify. Berlin has just released the English version of its guidelines to the Indo-Pacific, like the names of the Indo-Pacific, which sets out its activities in this region. And to some extent, given the close ties, I think the bilateral relationship can be used as a kind of anchor to cement Germany's regional approach. At first glance, the German guidelines appear to be a laundry list of what Germany is already doing in this region. The document, for example, mentions a host of impressive activities where Germany is working together with its institutions like ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and the G20, and with countries like Japan and Australia to strengthen multilateral decision-making frameworks. But a deeper reading of the document shows that for a player that is not usually even seen as active within the region, Germany's policymakers understand complexities here very well. And they understand that a certain degree of subtlety is required when outlining Germany's national policy towards the region. The German guidelines have been criticized in some quarters for a perceived lack of willingness to clearly blame Beijing for negative activities such as disinformation, and also for stressing that Germany does not want to see the emergence of a tight bilateral system where it and others in the region are forced to take sides between China and the United States that are increasingly more belligerent. However, it simply would not be politic for Germany to be seen to arrive in the region ready to preach to those who are already here about where they need to stand. Meanwhile, it's inconceivable to me that Germany, treaty ally of the United States, through NATO, although there are problems within the transatlantic relationship, it nevertheless is inconceivable to me that they wouldn't also have a close working relationship with Washington where they can in the region. So the subtext of the guidelines, to me, is more of a call given current challenges for a return to a reinforcement of multilateralism undergirded by the power of the United States, in part, that is again playing a mature and constructive role in the region. Good luck. Nevertheless, this sort of statement of intent aligns exactly with Australia's interests. We should see Germany's recent call at the United Nations rejecting excessive maritime claims in the South China Sea as a sign of where Germany stands in protection of the rules-based international order, and it is more or less in line with Australia. Now, aside from giving us a picture into German thought on the region, the guidelines will prove useful in the months ahead. Germany, of course, faces geopolitical challenges in its neighbourhood, and it will likely soon be fixated, not likely, it will soon be fixated on its own domestic politics as Angela Merkel steps down as Chancellor next year. There will be a temptation for Germans to take their eye off this region. However, the guidelines should provide ballast to help those invested here to convince the new German leadership that it needs to remain committed to the Indo-Pacific. And Australia is and should be committed to encouraging a player like Germany, with which it has so many interests in common, to play a more active role in the region. In the course of time, I'm sure we'll see the two countries make their relationship ever more warm, ever more vibrant, and ever more diverse by working together to actively engage the region in ways that complement the bilateral declaration, the German guidelines, and Australia's strategic planning. Indeed, there's a lot to work on. I'm encouraged by the fact that the guidelines highlight the important role of soft power and soft diplomacy, teaching people in the region about Germany, its language, and its culture. There's a personal thing in this for me. Germany was my first first foreign language. So, yeah. And as I said in German at the beginning of this address, it is people-to-people ties that undergird successful diplomatic relationships. If our institute, the Australian Institute of International Affairs, which is all about helping Australians and people in Australia know, understand, and engage more in international affairs, can help with this process, it will be our absolute pleasure to do so. Now, one of the other many priority areas that are mentioned in the guidelines is technology 4.0, and as I'm not the expert on that here today, I shall now turn the floor over to Michael Rosemann.
Yeah, schönen guten Abend. And I'd like to start by thanking the Australian Institute of International Affairs for this kind of collaboration and for the friendship. So I'd like to thank the Honorable Paul Lucas and, of course, Dr. Bryce Wakefield. It's a tremendous honor for us to come together tonight and to see how AIIA members and members of the German Australian community come together. And Bryce, rest assured, with a few German teachers here, you would have easily passed the exam. And you said there's a fear that Germany might be tempted to take the eye of the region. I promise you that myself and the German mission here in Australia will not just throw one eye, but both eyes at this region. And I'm quite confident the German-Australian friendship and partnership will only grow from strength to strength. Yeah, meine Damen und Herren, of course, I'd like to start as well by acknowledging our distinguished guest, Graham Parrott, the Shadow Assistant Minister for Education and Training. I'd like to, of course, welcome Detlef Sulzer. Detlef is, I refer to him as my consular grandfather. It's always great to have you here, and it's wonderful to see you. And when I came over in 98, I spent 3.5 months in Brisbane. I was funded by SAP, and it's a pleasure to have Jonathan here, Jonathan Bugatti. I tremendously value the partnership and friendship, and I'm only sitting here because of SAP, and it's fantastic that you came together with us, and I look forward to your words later. I'd like to welcome Simon Hewitt. Simon is the conductor of the Queensland Youth Orchestra, just back from Germany, and the tremendous performance you witnessed and enjoyed tonight is thanks to him. So, Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to welcome, of course, our consulars and my colleagues and friends from the Consular Corps here. In particular, the Dean of the Queensland Consular Corps, Anton Swan. Anton just spent some time with the Governor at the Governor House. As you might know or not, the Governor's House, Port Fernberg, German, distant mountain, was built by one of my predecessors, Häusler. It's great that you come from the Governor's House to us. So thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate this. Ladies and gentlemen, meine Damen und Herren, I of course like to as well acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are coming together tonight and pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. And I'm really deeply appreciative of the traditional role that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders continue to play in our community. In light of this tremendous history, stepping back 75 years, seems like a very small step. But 75 years ago, the world looked very different. The Second World War just came to an end. Most of the infrastructure, bridges, roads, airports, train stations were destroyed in Germany. 5 million units of living space were destroyed. We had 12 million refugees, mostly from East Europe, coming to Germany, and a lot of men, of course, remained prisoners of war. Agriculture could take care of maybe 1/3. In the tough winter of 45, 46, the average German had to survive on 1,500 calories a day. And people on the street had signs saying, we want coal and we want bread. And this was 47. You look today, only 75 years later, and as Bryce highlighted, Germany is a very different place. And for maybe the next half an hour of your life, I try to share my very personal view on why this is the case. But also like to highlight that it's equally important to look into the next 75 years and where I see significant challenges for Germany with a focus on industrialization. So in 48, things changed. In 48, we had a currency reform. And tonight I'll speak largely about the Federal Republic of Germany. And last year I spoke a lot about East Germany and Australia and the history there. So in 48, the Reichsmark and the Rentenmark got replaced by the D-Mark, the German mark. That meant no more black markets, people didn't hold back on their items. Confidence was rebuilt, and that confidence meant companies were created. In 48, one company that was created was Adidas. Adi Dassler, that's where Adidas comes from, created Adidas. He and his brother, Rudolf Dassler, since 27 had a shoe factory. Rudolf Dassler created a company called Ruda that is today known as Puma. Those two people hated each other. They had one in the same village. And then Puma today is the third biggest sports company in the world. Adidas, I think annual turnover 25 billion, the second biggest after Nike. Adidas, 6 years later, innovated spikes, and it's the rumor is that the German soccer team only won in Bern, Switzerland because of Adidas, but that meant a lot for the confidence of the German society when this took place. What you might not know, the famous 3 stripes were bought from a Finnish sports company for today €1,600 and 2 bottles of whiskey. So this is how Adidas got their 3 stripes. Now, with 48, the new currency, with 49, the Federal Republic of Germany saw its light. Made in Germany emerged as a brand name. Again, what you might not know, Made in Germany was not created by Germans, but anyone else? Sorry? England, yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was a way to highlight to the British people, be careful, this is made in Germany. This doesn't come from the UK, it's made in Germany. So we greatly picked up that brand name and probably carried it with us since then. So as a highlight, I'd like to share maybe 4 secrets of success. And I'm talking about a country where children spend 25% less at school than the Italian friends. I talk about a country where we have got the second lowest working hours per week in Europe. Only Dutch people work less than Germans in Europe. So this is a bit of context, and I want to explain why this is the case. So, World War, and the 2 powers that were not really destroyed in terms of infrastructure were the United States and Canada. And for the US, it was incredibly difficult to deal with Europe when Europe was destroyed. So the Secretary of State, George Marshall, gave a kind of relaxed speech at Harvard in 1947. It was more a proposal than a plan. He said, we need to rebuild Europe. We need to have a strong relationship. And what we like to see is that the Europeans come together and we will financially support you. And then President Harry Truman signed in 1948 the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan means the US gave $7 billion, which is by today's currency, I think more than $200 billion over 4 years to 60 nations. And that gave birth to what we know as the European Union. Maybe in the US, they would prefer the United Nations of Europe. And the idea was now it was left to the European nations to see what we do with it. And the coming idea was that you could buy items in America from the supplier. They got paid, but then the money was in a fund in Europe, and only then it was invested in whatever you proposed. Germany, to give you an idea, got 9% of these funds. So Britain, Italy, France got more. And what every other country knew, they would have never have to repay this. Germany didn't know. What does it mean for us? There's an economic conversation, there's a political conversation. Will there be economic revenge or not? It was a big uncertainty for Germany. As a result, Germany was very, very careful. Money was given out as a loan for interest, the money grew. It's accessible for decades later. It wasn't burned quickly. So that was one advantage that Germany had. And later in 1953 in London it was agreed that Germany paid back 1/3 of these funds. But these so-called ERP funds meant a lot. And so for America it meant prosperity. It meant a bit of an economic boundary to East Germany. And it meant that we could prosper and accelerate. The Marshall Fund, the Marshall Plan, roughly created only maybe 0.5% of GDP to Germany. But it was very psychological, much more than economic. And that psychological value, we move on, we look forward. There's no economic revenge, meant a lot to Germany. The second advantage was there was the Korea War. So when other countries built military items, Germany wasn't allowed to do this. So all we could do is produce cars, machines, consumer goods. And that gave rise to a German economy that characterized the 60s. And the economic growth was tremendous. In 1960, Germany was already the second biggest export country in the world. Having in mind that trade with East Europe fell from 17% to 4%. And that shows you what has happened in Germany since then. The other items are highlighted. So there was the funds, there was the psychological importance, there was the focus on civilian items, and last but not least, we gave birth to the United Nations of Europe. And this is visible today. Germany is a country that relies on import and export. So we could expand the market, but even more important, in 1999, as you know, the euro was introduced. And the euro probably is a currency that is weaker than the German mark would be today. That means an export-hungry country like Germany benefited from let's say, an undervalued currency. And it was good to drive Germany's export around the globe. So we call this in Germany the Wirtschaftswunder, an economic miracle. Chancellor Adenauer, Economics Minister Erhard, created an economy that witnessed a 183% increase in production between 1950 and 63. The average growth was 77.6% every single year for 15 years. In 1955, we built a 1 billion Volkswagen Beetle. And the typical German family moved from 1,500 calories to survival mode. And do I have coal in the basement? To eating a roast every Sunday. I grew up in a household like this, where Sunday lunch meant you had to come home. No matter what else was on the agenda, but 12:30, had to eat heavy food to celebrate well-being and a new level of affordability. Germany welcomed very early on individuals from various European countries, and more than 1 million so-called Gastarbeiter joined Germany by 1964. But Germans never borrowed heavily. And until today, you can see the interest rate in Germany is quite flat. We don't have massive inflation like what we saw in many places, including Australia. Germans hate credit cards. Germans hate debit cards. Germans love cash. And that meant that sort of cautiousness is also a reason for the risk aversion. So the Marshall Plan was one step. The second one is the social economics. So the balance between power in a company and the power of labor is very important. And big German companies, the unions, have a seat at the table. You don't make big executive decisions without the union being in the boardroom. So that's very important. And that's quite different to countries where it's more based on confrontation than consensus. And that's how it works in some European countries. So it's sort of looking for consensus is important. It also meant that education is very important. I personally do not know a single individual, I don't know of a single individual that went to a private school in Germany. I don't know anyone, I couldn't name a single person that paid ever fees for primary, secondary, high school, university, or PhD degree in Germany. So education is a public good. But I think what characterizes Germany is the model of apprenticeship. When you're 15, 16, 17, you do for vocational training, you go to technical college, and now they look down on you. You carry this as a proud stick into your career. And then apprenticeship model, soundness around trades, plumbing, electrician, whatever you do, is core to the German quality of workers that we find today. It also, as I highlighted earlier, means that the German kids tend to leave school at 1:15 to be home at lunch. And this is the reason why German children go on average far less to school than most of their counterparts globally. But the difference kicks in, I think, with higher education and apprenticeship. So these are a few fundamental models that explain. The other thing that's interesting in terms of labor, to give you an idea, the second quarter of 2020, like in most countries, the GDP in Germany dropped by more than 10%. One quarter. Anyone wants to have a guess by how much the unemployment rate dropped? Anyone? 2%? 3%? It dropped from 3.8%, it increased to 4.2, 0.4%. So it's quite counterintuitive that your GDP drops by 10% and the unemployment rate only drops by 0.4. The reason is, and that brings us to the idea of short working hours. In Germany, we have got what we call Kurzarbeit, short-time work. So organizations wouldn't get rid of individuals, they would condense working hours. You condense working hours, less hours, less wages, and the government subsidizes the gap. This explains why Germany didn't see not just now inflation, but also now massive increase in unemployment rate, including the significant challenges we face right now around the pandemic environment. So in summary, it's a sort of what we created in the 50s, the balance between labor and capital, that survived until today. And you can argue the main decisions that Chancellor Adenauer and Ludwig Erhard made post-World War carried until today and help us in times of a pandemic. Some people argue that Germany has been obsessed with cars and products and maybe not future-proofing technology. And I think an exception that we see today is SAP. SAP today is the worldwide leader in enterprise systems, created in 1972 by 5 former IBM employees. Today in 180 countries, more than 100,000 employees, and it's the third largest software company after Microsoft and Oracle. And it's headquartered in Waldorf, tiny little village that is just SAP village. And it's south of Frankfurt. And SAP is a nice example for an organization that supports the well-being of practically all big companies around the world. If SAP would not work, many companies would be bankrupt in 48 hours. It pumps the blood through these organizations. So I talk about Marshall Plan and social economics, stepping back in history. Today, the third argument for German success is decisiveness. Decisiveness. In June 2011, Chancellor Merkel, who, by the way, has a PhD in quantum chemistry, realized that maybe after Fukushima, reactors are not safe enough. And she made a bright move, the brave move, to switch off all reactors, 17 of them, by 2022. That equals 25% of the energy supply. Not enough. In January 2019, we decided to exit coal. 40% of the energy supply. Germany is the biggest producer of brown coal in the world. So you just switched off 50% and more of your energy supply. Constraints trigger innovation. And sometimes constraints are not like a pandemic. Sometimes constraints are homemade. And our chancellor made a constraint. We call it energy transition, Energiewende. And it put a lot of emphasis on renewable energy. Germany, to give you an idea, has as much sunshine as Alaska. On a good day, 3 hours on average. And still, I meet Australian engineers who say the best solar technology comes out of Germany. How is that possible? Yeah, when you have an export appetite, when you create a constraint at home. Germany was decisive when Chancellor Kohl on the 19th of December 1989 was in Dresden. And in his mind, in the morning, he said, we might have unification in 10 years. In the evening, over whiskey in a hotel, he said, we need this ASAP. And Germany was reunited 11 months later. Chancellor Merkel was decisive when she welcomed refugees, realizing we needed new labor, we need to do the right thing for humanitarian reasons. And both decisions have been economically beneficial. So decisive leaders are probably the third argument. The fourth, final, and most obvious is, of course, industrialization in what we call Industry 4.0. Industry 4.0 is actually invented by the German government. It's based on a national strategic initiative. It's today symbolic for how factories are run, how companies work. And if you enter Industry 4.0 in Google, you probably find robotics and a car manufacturer. You find personalized services, quantum computing, data performance, IoT, 3D printing, and so on. Germany now treats this as a massive export opportunity. Siemens is an example. Siemens set up labs in 5 universities around the country. Siemens, in fact, sells and offers Industry 4.0 curriculum to education providers in Australia. Australia picked up the idea under the label of mining 4.0. I see an opportunity for Australia to do what Germany did to Industry 4.0. What I hope, and that's now moving towards my fear and challenges, that we don't stop at the factory. What I call Industry 5.0 is not smart production, but smart consumption. It's great to throw high tech at the car manufacturer, but today's world is people empowered. Industrialization empowered companies, digitization empowers people. And that's a sort of fine balance Germany has to fulfill. So I want to end up with a brief outlook on what I see are the 4 challenges. The first one is moving from a focus on products, the German car, the German machine, to experiences. If you hop in a Tesla, your car continuously will improve. Make to evolve. German companies probably still talk about make to order and make to stock. When I sell a car, it's the end of the relationship. For Elon Musk, it's the beginning of a relationship. And these models of continuous connectivity is what we have to work on. We do this. BMW invented Park Now. You press a button in your BMW that is called Park Now, and will take you to a car park, a commercial car park, or a crowdsourced car park like the garage of your neighbor. The challenge for Germany, I think, is not to put the internet in the car, but to put the car into the internet. Not to digitize a product, but to create new experiences. And that's sometimes a challenge for a German engineer who loves a screwdriver and products. The second one is platforms. If you Google the biggest companies by share value, you won't find a German company in the top 40, and SAP is 41. Platforms, Google, Amazon, Alibaba, are running the world. And independent platform design, again, is something that's maybe not intuitive to the German engineering mind. An example, a positive one is Zalando. Zalando, created in 2008, provides a sort of fashion and shopping retail outlet in Europe. But what Zalando has done for 6 years now, profit, a lot of failure, a lot of experimentation. 50% of all products that you buy at Zalando are returned. And 60% of all orders come by a smartphone. This is the life of a typical platform model, and it's very different to typical family-owned German Mittelstand company. So we need to find a way to ensure that platform providers like this also increasingly are headquartered in Europe. And today, I think we can say that Berlin is the startup capital of Europe. We have the foundation in place. Australia has a landing pad in Berlin. We just have to activate it, grow it. And then we see that Germany is not just the land of Dichter and Denker, poets and thought leaders, but continues to be the country of inventors and engineers. Third, and with my honorary consul hat, I should say this too loud, I think Germany's e-government capabilities need development. Germany ranked 20th out of 28 EU members and 9th in a recent government as a platform ranking by extension. In Europe, Europeans submit frequent forms to their government. Every third is doing this. In Germany, every 7th. And while in other countries we use artificial intelligence for crime or traffic issues, we have a long way to go. Germany might be great on Industry 4.0, but I think we have to reinvent government 4.0. And that's a challenge because a digital government is a great facilitator for digital business models. And last, not least, but crucial, in Germany, believe it or not, cash is still king. It's quite surprising when people come to Germany and they have to pay cash. The average German carries 100 euros in their wallet. The Bundesbank, the German bank, printed more euros since 22 than all other European countries together. I think 48% of all payments in Germany are made in cash. In Australia, it's 27%. So as long as you love cash, you won't fall in love with online shopping. You won't do platform models. So you can see we have a number of challenges that we need to address. We have startups like N26 that I think show the world. But for me, open platform models, the digitalization of experiences, e-government, and overcoming cash are probably 4 challenges. So in conclusion, Zalando said, we believe in future there will be new products that can be created in real time. If you buy a book on Amazon, it's real printed. Digitalization is light on assets, industrialization is heavy on assets. This is driven by a business model, that's a traditional pricing model. They will come together. In the future, you buy a product and it will be printed the moment you order it. And that sort of backbone industrialization knowledge will be beneficial. I started with Adidas and I want to finish with Adidas. Only recently, a few years ago, Adidas created what they call a speed factory. They deploy large-scale 3D printing, and instead of having a mini distribution center, they create mini factories in America and Germany. The idea is to bring production back from Asia to Germany. So you can see how from early beginnings after World War to today, Adidas has gone a long way, and it's a role model for I think where Germany could be in the new digital world of industrialization. I only hope that Germany will take those steps as quickly as some of the leading athletes in the Adidas shoes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we take questions, please go up to the bar and get something to drink, because it's on us at the moment, and after 8 o'clock we'll be paying for it. So please take advantage of that, and so you'll have to bring your cash out later on. We'll go to questions in a second. I'll grab you after questions. I should say this, Bryce. My German isn't that good. I did it till grade 6, and I remember Stade Sprechen, and the only phrase I can remember is Fritz ist heute krank. So, Fritz, I'm very sorry that you were locked off. And can I say also, Michael, how could one possibly want to buy a Mercedes-Benz over something that British Leyland might have made in the 1970s? I really can't, for the life of me, understand that. But that's me. And if what you said about Adidas was true, I wouldn't have been playing in the 4th 15 at school. I would be playing in the 1st 15 because I certainly had Adidas boots. Ladies and gentlemen, what we'll now do is, as I said, please go and grab a drink. But we'll go to question time now. But I'll reserve the right of the chair to ask the first question. Michael, we've seen very much in many parts of Europe the terrible scourge of balkanisation, of regional conflicts, of countries in great dispute internally as a result of tensions that have come to the surface and have certainly been exacerbated in recent times. Germany is very proud of its regions and has regional differences that are very significant. But how has it managed to avoid that balkanisation that we've seen in other parts of Europe and indeed the world?
That's a very good question, Paul. So I think right now Germany's got 16 states, and those 16 states are far more different than the states we have in Australia. I would hop in a car, drive 3 hours, and struggle with the accent, and then menu and the rest would still be in Germany. When we responded to the pandemic, Chancellor Merkel brought all 16 states together and said, we need to avoid having isolated solutions. And while we still have a very decentralized policy, for example, in education, on the big item, we work as one. Because Germany is a country that relies on scale. So if you have a country that relies on scale, you need a lot of internal customers. And this is why I think common rules are very important. Second comment I want to make, 40% of all COVID victims right now come from outside Germany. And Chancellor Merkel said, we will never close the border. So I think that the German mind is not just being cohesive within Germany, it's really to keep up the idea of Europe for as long as somewhat possible.
Okay, where's priming? Any time for questions from the audience? Can I just ask that we've only got about 15 minutes of questions, so if everyone wouldn't mind not talking while we're doing questions, that would be wonderfully appreciated. So does anyone from the audience have any questions? I'll get the microphone to you.
With regard to the private schools you mentioned, I grew up that way in public schools, etc. And also we did have private schools, namely one, the Waldorfschule, if you remember that.
So, of course, Germany is not private schools. I didn't say we don't have private schools. All I said is they're not as popular as in other countries. And I think they're getting more popular, no doubt. Yes, our private schools get more popular. Again, I think the German narrative is to keep education as a public good, as an attractive public good for as long as possible. We won't exclude the private market, the good private schools. All I said is they're not as popular as in other countries.
Questions?
Professor, I know it's nearly 30 years now since reunification. Has the reunification gone as well as everyone hoped for? And have the standards of living of all those who live in what was the cost zone reached the same level as the people who lived in the Buddhist Republic?
The second question, the answer is probably no. So we still have salary gaps. The infrastructure is not the same, and of course, the majority of big headquarters are still more in West than in East Germany. We probably didn't have the expected move of big headquarters to the new capital early. I mean, one design idea was to have the capital in East Germany and make it an attractive place. But moving the political power doesn't mean economic power follows immediately. If it worked as well as it should, we don't have a benchmark. So it's very hard when something is unique on a global scale. It probably worked better than we thought. It worked faster than we thought. But again, we don't have any blueprint. When I say a decisive leader needs to lead without having a clear roadmap. You do sometimes what your gut tells you, and I think that's what Kohl did in '89 when he said, let's open the border. It definitely opened the market, the East European market for Germany. As I highlighted, we dropped from 17 to 4% after the World War, and the reunification made all of a sudden East Europe became accessible. And I think that was a massive, tremendous benefit for Germany.
Other questions, James?
Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I'll get you go, Graham, and I'll give James a second.
Just wanted to ask about the change to 40% of the energy supply with the brown coal. We don't have that in Queensland. We have calorific coal. But we still, at the last election, we had a federal government that made a commitment to building a coal-fired power station, and more recently, they've committed to or flagged the idea of a gas-fired power station. Neither of those seem to be particularly renewable focused. I just wondered how you could take out 50% of your energy supply and have set up a buying nuclear power from France or elsewhere.
So good question. In Germany, unlike Australia, is of course surrounded by countries. So we consume gas and other sources of energy from our neighbors. Energy policy is something where every single country wants to be theoretically autonomous. So the crisis now, you don't want to rely on your neighbors. And you don't want to pretend a switch off nuclear and buy it from somewhere else. I honestly believe we see the evacuation as a massive incentive for renewable energy. If you see the efficiency gains we see with wind farms, for example, with solar energy, it's a bit like what you see with computing. It might not be more slower, but the exponential productivity gains are tremendous. It's just without a constraint, you're not progression. And my point was sometimes it's important to artificially increase this. There are critics who say we probably don't have plan B in case the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't win. But I believe that hydrogen, green hydrogen in particular, the renewable energy contribute to the electrolysis is the future. And Germany has a national hydrogen strategy. On the 14th of October, we have a German-Australian workshop on hydrogen partnerships. I strongly believe that Germany will do whatever to explore the future potential of hydrogen.
James, you've got one. By the way, plenty of Russian gas goes to Europe.
It's no question that Germany is the economic giant, but in many respects, it is still a political picture. And 75 years after the end of World War II, it is still an occupied country by the Americans and others. And the influence of that is seen in the recent issue involving the alleged attempted assassination of a minor Russian official, where it has led to cries within Germany for the cancellation of Nord Stream 2, a project obviously in Germany's interests, when Germany reflect its political power in a political sense and kick the Americans out as they really deserve to be.
As I alluded to after the World War, you have a political crisis, and the question is, can I decouple economic development from political history? We probably right now are in a similar situation. So you might be an economic powerhouse, and there are all kinds of reasons, energy reasons, military support, economic supply chains, why you rely on people outside. I have to admit that on the German-American relationship is a bit tense at the moment. But for an economic powerhouse like Germany, we cannot afford having any negative relationships with any country in the world, especially when they're big economic powerhouses. So Germany is not a confrontational country. Germany will not actively kick someone out. But as I highlighted, as Paul alluded to, sometimes, and like the questions before, energy constraints mean that you have to build partnerships, of course, as well. So Germany will not kick out America. Germany will do whatever we can to build a new level of friendship on all levels with the United States. And in today's environment is so tightly coupled, especially the economic and the political environment. Such multidimensional problems are difficult to manage, but we will not be confrontational. That is for sure.
Okay, we've got time for two questions left. Can we? And the AIIA had a pretty good go, as you can tell by the questions. Would any of the German people or German guests, I don't mean German people, they don't have to be German, can be if you like to ask any questions? I'll take them in preference over there. I'd like to ask some questions about Australia, if we're happy to answer them.
Unfortunately, it's going to be a question about Germany. Thank you for this very interesting talk. You've already mentioned Tesla. If you subtract the auto industry from Germany, it's very different country. Tesla has just had a presentation on how to scale up battery production. And I'm a little bit worried about that because it looks a bit like the German auto industry is 7, 8, 10 years behind on some of those things. Because for some time there hasn't been this decisiveness that you have mentioned that has been there in other areas. I just like to ask you to comment on this. What do you think, how this is going to develop in the future?
So this is a very good question, and you're right. The German car industry is substantial. I come from Bremen. In Bremen, 11% of all workers directly, indirectly work for Daimler. So if you see organizations like Volkswagen with 500,000 employees, if they have a challenge, then Germany has a challenge. I agree, maybe not to the same level of marketing, that Tesla probably puts itself better to the press. Germany is welcoming. You might know that the new Tesla factory is built right now south of Berlin. So again, we're not confrontational. We welcome that sort of competition. You might also know that big Chinese startups, that Tesla, recruit German engineers because they value their expertise. We see massive progression, I think, at Volkswagen, Daimler, and Porsche in terms of the battery. But what I said earlier, I also believe you look for alternatives like hydrogen, markets that are probably less contested right now. But you have to have in mind that when the majority of your workforce works on the combustion engine, and the industrialized world is asset intensive. It's very hard to move in an asset intensive industry as opposed to the digital industry. And so what paid us well, asset intensity, well qualified individuals, now of course is a challenge. We know this, we will as a government subsidize and invent here. And believe me, the R&D that happens in these organizations is massive that is going on. But the car industry, for a number of reasons, even before COVID, of course, globally had massive challenges. And I think what we see more and more is sort of going to mobility services. What you also see, I mean, BMW and Mercedes, they're a bit like the two Adidas brothers. They're not best friends, but they come together on new mobility solutions. So I think we see more and more new business models, new collaborations. But I couldn't agree more with you that the German future very much is also a question of where the German future of the car industry. And I right now can't with certainty say where we are in 5 or 10 years, but I remain confident.
Certainly one of the things, I think one of the reasons that German cars are so fine and wonderful, work so well is the great empiricists that Germans are. I remember being in Stuttgart once and I said, you know, where's the park? And any other country, they'd say, oh, it's just around the road there and go up a bit. In Germany, it's 224 meters to the right. Whatever, they're always get it right. Last question, Kwame, who have we got? Fire away.
This is on behalf of Julianne on the online live stream. Michael, why do you think it is that Australia has a much better developed mobile phone network and internet speed than Germany? How could this happen in a technology-driven country like Germany, and what are the impacts now on the development of Industry 4.0?
So we're having in mind the geography of Germany is very different to the geography of Australia. Australia is one of the most urbanized countries in the world. So the network topology, of course, is very different in Australia than when you have like a long tail country. It's a fine network. So the technological challenges are, of course, different in Germany than in Australia. Again, Germany's digital infrastructure, when we talk about 5G, is probably not as developed as some in the other countries. Again, we understand that this sort of infrastructure, similar to the infrastructure we built for the autonomous vehicle, is something that matters a lot. It's just very hard if on all fronts you innovate the product, the service, the business model, the infrastructure, the government policy. You have to get a lot of things right in a fast-moving world. And like the previous question, investments in the renewal of mobility service and massive infrastructure investment to facilitate 5G or whatever comes after is a massive piece of German homework. So yes, it's a sore issue, but something that will be addressed.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, can you join me in thanking Michael for such a wonderful contribution? Just two final short things of a housekeeping nature before we leave you to your German barbecue, especially catered for by Parliament House. They're very keen to provide us with a German one, so I'm interested in your opinion as to. I've certainly had a German pork knuckle on many occasions, German club, but we'll see what the German barbecue is. But there are two people now that I'd like to introduce you to and hear from. The first is Jonathan Fogarty from SAP. like any event, it would be more expensive or more difficult to hold if it didn't have a sponsor. So could I thank SAP tonight for being the sponsor of tonight's event. SAP need no introduction. They are a massive German company that has played a real role in large enterprise computing systems, both at a government level, and certainly in my day that was the case, but also in large mining and infrastructure applications as well. Jonathan is the industry business architect for utilities, and I'll welcome him to say a few words on behalf of SAP.
Thank you, mate. Hello, and a big thanks to the Honourable Paul Lucas and the AIIA for hosting the event, and to Dr. Bryce Wakefield and Professor Michael Rosemann as well for your kind words. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Now, Paul, I've got an hour, one hour, 5 minutes between you people and a bratwurst. Everybody can't come up. I should put more money into these. Thank you. All right, so I'll keep it to my 5-minute allocation on that basis. Look, SAP very, very proud to be involved in this event for German Week here at Parliament House. Tonight, our heritage and origins, as you heard from Professor Rosemann, very much proudly German. And to those unaware, now you've heard already, SAP is Germany's highest valued company on the stock exchange. We were founded in 1972 by 5 young tech entrepreneurs who thought perhaps their businesses could be supported in a better way, and have now built an organisation of over 100,000 people across the globe, supporting some of the world's biggest brands across 26 different industries. Our more than 440 customers come in all sizes and work in every industry and geographic region that you could potentially imagine. That includes 92% of the Forbes Global 2000 and 98% of the world's top 100 most valuable brands. Some are some big household names that you probably know, while others are small but ambitious startups that are just beginning to grow. I could stand here tonight and talk to you about the trillions of dollars of transactions that go through SAP systems each year, or the multitude of goods and services ordered through our networks. But in my humble experience, people get much more excited when I mention our customers produce things like 85% of the world's dog food gets produced by SAP customers. 86% of the world's athletic footwear, like Adidas, as you heard, and maybe more importantly, 64% of all the world's ice cream gets produced by SAP customers. So speaking of eating your own dog food, here in Queensland, which you won't be getting tonight here at the beautiful annex, here in Queensland, SAP have got a long and cherished position in supporting many of the functions at state and local government level. The services provided to our fellow Queenslanders, whether it be innovative and efficient ways of helping the process of tax and revenue collection, or providing simple interfaces to ratepayers to report broken street lights or faulty barbecues needing repair. We provide the digital infrastructure and processes for a modern and emerging economy. Now at SAP, we're seeing the impacts of COVID and the COVID pandemic in an increase in digitalisation that won't come as a surprise, and many organisations are accelerating the shift to becoming an intelligent enterprise, and along the lines, industry lines are being rapidly blurred. With this digitalisation, community and customer expectations are very much changing, and this is happening rapidly, and this is placing more pressure on organisations to be responsive, multi-channel and agile to meet the needs of this changing world. At SAP, we believe it is our unique responsibility to support the next generation of consumer expectation with our technology platforms and the solutions, and Michael's spoken quite eloquently about that already. Finally, I could mention the work we're very proud of that we do with our community partners, such as Red Kite or the Smith family or the Business Women's Network. But what I'd like to perhaps leave you with tonight and highlight is an initiative that started with SAP and our community right here in Brisbane 11 years ago, and it's become a nationwide, indeed an ANZ phenomenon, and it's the Young ICT Explorers. And this is an event or a competition that allows kids in both primary and secondary schools the opportunity to work on STEM-related projects, build prototypes and pitch them to industry representatives on behalf of their school.
Should have bought the iPad.
Should have bought the iPad. Now, this provides them with the opportunity to showcase their innovative thinking and entrepreneurial spirit, whilst helping them build the types of skills that the next generation of Queenslanders will need in a digital world. Last year alone, across Australia and New Zealand, more than 1,200 students from grades 3 up to grade 12 across more than 100 different schools submitted over 500 unique projects for the judges' consideration. Now, this year, understandably, the event is going virtual, and I would urge any parents out there to encourage your kids and your school to participate. Perhaps the next, or I should say, we are going virtual. If you want to jump online, youngictexplorers.net.au and get your school and your kids involved. Perhaps the next global technology powerhouse, the next Tesla or the next SAP, will come from right here in Queensland. And the passion and determination of the next generation that we hope to inspire for our kids for the future. So that's all I wanted to say. I didn't really want to talk too much about SAP, but rather thank the AIIA for having us and for letting us be part of this community. It's a role we take very, very seriously, and we hope the next generation of tech entrepreneurs will be the boys and girls that are out there in Queensland at the moment. So have a great night. I don't want to get between you and your bratwurst. Enjoy, and thank you for having us here this evening.
Thanks very much, Jonathan. I've got to say, the thing that I was really interested in is that SAP are responsible for most of the dog food market. That is probably back to a year 6 German phrase on it. Conrad steht mit dem Hund. So it's all coming back to me. I don't know what I'm going to know after Simon speaks about music in my German lessons. But anyway, I'll now call on Simon Hewitt, who is the principal conductor of the Queensland Youth Orchestra. We've been very lucky tonight to have the Queensland Youth Orchestra Chamber Orchestra tradition section playing for us, and it's wonderful to make and support us in that regard. Can I acknowledge not only Simon, but also Jeff Rossbrook, the General Manager of Queensland Youth Orchestras, Bernadette Rossbrook, and also, and I'll just name the 4 performers, and if we can give them a specific round of hands. Liam Preisberg, violinist, Sophia Jones, violinist, Ella Pison, violist, and Joshua Jones, cellist. So thank you very much. Now I'll hand over to Germany.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I was delighted to accept the invitation to come along tonight, and especially to give our wonderful musicians the opportunity to perform. Tonight really unites 2 passions of mine, music and Germany. Interestingly, Michael and I only met about a month ago, but when we were sharing our stories, we figured that around the time he was arriving in Brisbane, I was leaving for Germany. I'm 44 years old now. I spent 22 years of my life here in Brisbane, growing up, training to become a professional musician, going through the ranks of the Queensland Youth Orchestra until I, thanks to a German government scholarship, went to Germany and studied orchestral and operatic conducting for 3 years in Weimar. Upon graduating, I worked for the Sydney Opera for a number of years. Met Simone Young. She offered me a position at the Hamburg Opera, and I worked with her for 3 wonderful years as assistant music director. After which, I went to the Stuttgart Opera as principal conductor, and then continued to work with the Hamburg Ballet as well. And I enjoyed a career really beyond my wildest dreams over those years, being based in Germany and working throughout Europe. I only recently returned to Brisbane. This year, of course, has been full of disruptions, but for me, it's also had a very significant silver lining in that I've been able to reconnect with this wonderful organisation, the Queensland Youth Orchestra, which is such an important platform for training young musicians to go out into the world. I don't know if any of you are aware, we have in any given year 700 musicians in 7 different ensembles, from our flagship orchestra, the Queensland Youth Symphony, right down to our junior strings, where you have young musicians coming in and learning the skills of orchestral performance. And I think what's so wonderful about an orchestra, it really brings together some of the attributes that I also admire in Germany. You really have to have the the confidence to function as an individual, as a soloist, where you have to have the humility to also listen to others and to accompany them at the same time. And I think those are such fundamental life skills that I think it's a really important task that we have, fostering the talents of the young musicians at the Queensland Youth Orchestra, not just those who are going to go on and have wonderful professional careers, but also those who are just going to go into other professions as well. Because I think those skills, having the confidence to be yourself, with the humility to work with and listen to others, are skills that you can really, for your whole life, profit from. So that's what we do at the Queensland Youth Orchestra. And as we plan coming out of this disruptive year for next year, we hope to be back in our normal performance mode next year. And I'd like to just briefly share with you some of the activities that might have a little bit of a German tinge. For one of our major concerts next year at QPAC, we will be performing Mahler's magnificent Second Symphony, the Wiederauferstehung. And we would encourage everybody in the German community to get behind us and come to that performance. If you'd like to support us in really any way, whether that's financial contribution or also any in-kind donation, we would be grateful and very happy to work with anybody who could see some kind of synchronicity between your activities and ours. And another initiative that I'm very keen to build out is to connect Brisbane to Germany and to build out this pathway that I was able to travel thanks to a German government scholarship. What I plan to do is to make available an apartment that I own in Berlin for a 4-month period each year to a musician who's graduated from the ranks of the Queensland Youth Symphony and was seeking funds for airfare and a living allowance, so that one musician each year can go and stay in this apartment and take advantage of the wonderful cultural activities that arguably Berlin is the classical music capital of the world, with 7 professional orchestras, and they have an opportunity there to really through master classes, through auditions, to build a professional career for themselves. And so we're looking to build out that opportunity as well. And if anybody's interested in working with us along those lines, we'd be very happy to hear from you. So thank you very much for your time tonight. And once again, I congratulate our young musicians for their splendid performance.
Well, thank you, Simon, and that concludes the formalities. The meals are being served now. Don't forget to go and